Hi, I'm Bruce Huhmann. Today, we're going to start looking at different types of ethical theories. Those who study ethics are concerned with the nature of value. In other words, why do we prefer or value some things and acts above others? How judgments can be made, how judgments can be improved, and how moral attitudes arise and change. An ethical theory is a framework within which one can reflect on the acceptability of actions and can evaluate ethical judgments and character. Thus, ethical theories present ways to approach ethical decision-making. No single ethical theory has universal acceptance. Some common ethical theories include consequentialism. The most common form of consequentialism is utilitarianism. Consequentialism is also known as teleological ethics because it emphasizes results or outcomes. We also have egoism. The most famous form of egoism is libertarianism. Like consequentialism and virtue ethics, egoism is normative because it's about what the standards or norms of behavior should be. Egoism believes that people ought to do what is in their own self-interest. Then we have justice and fairness, which is focused on the equitable distribution of cost and benefits. We have virtue ethics, which emphasizes developing a moral character. And finally, deontological, which is also known as duty-based or principle-based ethics. Deontological or principle-based ethics emphasizes always following consistent moral rules. Now, the two ethical theories that are dominant in business ethics are typically utilitarianism and deontology or principle-based ethics. Although these two are the most common, other ethical theories also have a place in organizational ethics and can help solve ethical problems that are not addressed well using only utilitarian or deontological approaches. For example, in social marketing, a lot of ethics focuses on fairness and justice. All acts, practices, and institutions have multiple consequences affecting multiple people. In consequentialist ethics, an act is right or wrong depending only on the consequences of the action, not the circumstances or the intrinsic nature of the act or anything that happens before the act. Some examples of consequentialist ethics that we're going to talk about are utilitarianism and hedonism. One of the benefits of consequentialist ethics is that no one person's happiness is more important than another's. We are all equal. A second benefit of consequentialist ethics is that it forces us to examine the outcomes of our decisions. In utilitarian ethics, the good or utility for each person affected counts equally. John Stuart Mill's term good or utility is also employed by economists. Thus, using utilitarian ethics to guide decisions means choosing the action that would produce better overall consequences or outcomes for the individual, business, or society than would be produced by other alternatives under consideration. Better consequences promote human well-being, the happiness, health, dignity, integrity, freedom, and respect of all the people affected. If a basic human value is individual happiness, then an action which promotes more of that than does an alternative is more reasonable and more justified from a utilitarian ethics point of view. A decision promoting the greatest amount of these values for the greatest number of people is the most reasonable one. Because utilitarianism decides based on the consequences, and because the consequences of our actions will depend on the specific facts of each situation, utilitarianism tends to be very pragmatic. In utilitarianism, no act is ever absolutely right or wrong in all cases, in every situation. Instead, it depends on the consequences. For example, lying is neither right nor wrong in and of itself, according to utilitarian ethics. There may be situations in which lying will produce greater overall good than telling the truth. In such a situation, it would be ethically justified to tell a lie. You may have already or probably will encounter the term utility in an economics class. In economics, utility tends to have a fairly precise definition, but utility can mean a variety of different things in the philosophy of ethics because different people see well-being or happiness to mean different things. No matter if we're rich or poor, male or female, left or right, all over the world, we share a desire for greater well-being or happiness. Now, one of the founders of the ethical theory of utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham, noted that all mankind desires more pleasure and less pain. So as the basis of legal, business, individual, or societal decisions about what is the right course of action, we should act in a way that maximizes the overall level of pleasure and minimizes the overall level of pain. Our founding fathers stated in the Constitution that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That recognition of the equality of all people and the liberty or freedom to pursue our own happiness, what brings us the most utility, represents the utilitarianism that has been central to much of our way of government. Now, here I have Jeremy Bentham's book, An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill are founders of the consequentialist ethical theory of utilitarianism. Utilitarian ethics says that the promotion of human well-being is what ethics should be all about. Bentham came up with the greatest happiness principle. The greatest happiness principle asserts that the greatest ratio of good to bad consequences should guide ethical decision-making. In utilitarianism, the good or utility for each person counts equally. This was later taken up by John Stuart Mill, who said the greatest happiness principle holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. So what we want with the greatest happiness principle is the most good for the greatest number of people. And good is defined as satisfaction of personal preferences of all affected. In other words, all stakeholders. So basically, for utilitarian decision-making, we perform a hedonic calculus. We sum the good and bad consequences of alternative actions and then choose the action that will produce the greatest net happiness. According to utilitarianism, options are assessed according to their immediate result. Utilitarianism is not concerned with long-term consequences or indirect repercussions because these are difficult to discern. When evaluating consequences, we don't want to ignore our own happiness, but we also don't want to give more weight to our own happiness than the happiness of anyone else. Because remember, in utilitarianism, all stakeholders' happiness should be weighted equally. Now, we say that utilitarianism weighs consequences. Well, what consequences should we weigh? Should we weigh the actual consequences, which is done in actual outcome utilitarianism, which says that the correct standard to judge if an act was ethical is the actual consequences of that action, whether or not that outcome was foreseen beforehand? Or should the consequences that we calculate be based on the expected outcome? Expected outcome utilitarianism, on the other hand, holds that the correct standard to judge if an act was ethical is not the actual consequences of that action, but rather its probable or foreseen consequences. Because we can't know what the actual consequences are going to be, but we can have an expectation of what the likely consequences will be. So is it better to take the action that we think is going to have the best consequences, or is it better to take the action that actually had the best consequences? Now, of course, we have lots of decisions to make every day, and so we don't have time to calculate the utility of all alternative courses of action. So expected outcome utilitarianism believes that we can and should follow certain well-established rules of thumb or guidelines that can generally be relied upon to produce good results. In other words, heuristics. So we looked at divisions of utilitarianism based on the type of consequences, expected versus actual. Now we're going to look at whether it's better to weigh the action itself or create a rule for all actions. Because circumstances change, utilitarianism has no principles or general rules of ethical behavior. But these two subclasses of utilitarianism interpret this fact differently. First, let's look at act utilitarianism. Here, decisions are based on the ratio of good to bad consequences for that specific action alone. Now, when Jeremy Bentham came up with the original type of utilitarianism, it was really act utilitarianism. And act utilitarianism holds that we should decide how to act in any given situation by considering what course of action will cause the most pleasure and the least pain for all involved. Bentham even came up with what we call in marketing terms a jingle for his hedonic calculus. He came up with this rhyme to try to make his hedonic calculus more memorable. Intense, long, certain, speedy, fruitful, pure, such marks in pleasure and in pains endure. Such pleasures seek if private be thy ends. If it be public, wide let them extend. Such pains avoid, whichever be thy view. If pains must come, let them extend to few. Critics of act utilitarianism say it seems concerned only with maximizing animal-like pleasures. Their criticism can be termed, all things being equal, pushpin is equal to poetry. What is pushpin? It's a childish game. What they're really saying is there's no way to evaluate the kind of good or utility desired by different individuals. Lower pleasures and higher pleasures give us equal pleasure, so really there's no difference. John Stuart Mill, though deeply influenced by Bentham, defended higher pleasures over lower pleasures. He argued that even a utilitarian could think it better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied, because those who have the education to properly experience the pleasures of poetry and pushpin would prefer poetry. In fact, Mill's ranking measure is as follows. Of two pleasures, if there be one to which all or almost all who have experience of both give a decided preference, irrespective of any feelings of moral obligation to prefer it, then that is the more desirable pleasure.